Welcome to Preemptive Strike, the show where we look at the first hour of a JRPG to gauge the entertainment value of its opening act and gather statistical data to analyze the trends across different games. Join us as we journey through the rich history of JRPGs to see how their gameplay evolves and innovates from one game to the next. For each game, we'll examine how the first hour sets the tone for the rest of the journey, explore the ways in which the story and gameplay unfold to draw the player into the world and keep them coming back, as well as explain general tips, tricks, and trivia for a first-time player. Today, we'll discuss all of this and more on Preemptive Strike.
Hello, and welcome to episode 5 of Preemptive Strike, the show where we talk about all the things you need to know before starting up a retro RPG. This week, we will be talking about Final Fantasy II for the Famicom.
Alright, so Final Fantasy II, the first time we got it in the West, we've known it as Final Fantasy Origins, essentially, since the first release we got was for the PlayStation 1, where it was bundled with Final Fantasy 1. Other versions we've got were called Final Fantasy 1 and 2, Dawn of Souls for the GBA, and then we've just got Final Fantasy II whenever it came as a standalone for like iOS and like the Pixel remaster later on. But the original game was released for the Famicom on December 17th, 1988. And around that time, Mario 3, Wizardry 4, and Ultima 4 were all out in Japan. And we just covered DQ3, and Final Fantasy II came out about 10 months after DQ3.
So, after doing the DQ3 episode, and I think Yuji Horii said that, a development time of 1 year was very significant. Seeing a 10-month gap between Final Fantasy II and DQ3 is a very significant gap. And I think that really shows just by the sheer scale of Final Fantasy II, but we'll get to that.
Of course, yeah. So as I was getting at before, Final Fantasy II, we got it for the first time in the West on April 8th, 2003. That's a 5,218-day gap between the original release in Japan and then when we finally got into the West. But the other crazy thing about this release is that the PS2 had already been out for 3 years almost, but they were still they released this on the PlayStation 1. So like, I really don't get it, but I guess at the same time too, the PS2 is backwards compatible, so.
Yeah, and to be fair, we were getting Just Dance games on the Wii until 2019.
So, like Final Fantasy 1, Final Fantasy II was also developed and published by Square. It had the same notable staff members as Final Fantasy 1. We had Hironobu Sakaguchi being the director and writer, Nasir Gabali being the programmer, or at least he makes sure you see his name on the title screen. We got Nobuo Uematsu with the music, and then we got Yoshitaka Amano with the art. Now, if you're looking to collect this game, since it's, or at least for the Famicom version, Japanese games or retro games are very cheap. You could get the cartridge for about $17, $18, and you get the complete box with the manual and the cardboard for about $60. And sales-wise, it didn't sell super great. I mean, 800,000 copies in Japan by 1994 is still respectable, even with today's like standards for game sales, but for the series of Final Fantasy as a whole, it has sold the fewest copies of any of the first 10 games.
And plus, Square Enix, at this point Square, but nowadays Square Enix has always had a really high standard for what they consider a good amount of sales. So even with 800,000 copies sold of Final Fantasy II, I can see why they would consider that very bad.
So I kind of alluded to this before, but did you go over some of the remakes and ports that Final Fantasy II has, Chad?
Oh yeah, so Final Fantasy II, while it's not quite as beloved as Final Fantasy 1, it's available on just about as many consoles as Final Fantasy 1. So of course it came out on the Famicom originally, but apparently there was a bundle on the Famicom with Final Fantasy 1. So Final Fantasy 1 and 2 released on the Famicom individually, but then in 1994 there was a bundle with both of them together on the Famicom.
I don't even understand how they fit that all into one cartridge.
I don't know either, but it exists. It also was released on the WonderSwan, as well as the Wii, Wii U, and 3DS Virtual Console, but only in Japan. As for worldwide, or at least North American releases, we have the PlayStation, the Game Boy Advance, the PSP, and also any of the modern phones, so like Android, iOS. And then finally, we have the Pixel Remaster, which was basically all modern consoles. So it's pretty easy to get your hands on Final Fantasy II nowadays. To beat the game, it takes about a little bit more than 20 hours. So according to How Long to Beat, the main story is 21 and a half hours, whereas going for some of that extra content boosts it up to 25 hours. But it's all around, I think, a pretty good game. I think it's 20 hours is a decent amount of time to put into one of these games. Not too long, but not too short. As far as the lasting appeal goes, though, it seems that it was received pretty favorably in Japan. So in Famitsu, it got a 35 out of 40. Keep in mind that Dragon Quest III got a 38 out of 40, so only 3 points behind Dragon Quest III. And it was actually one of the highest scoring games of 1988 in the Famitsu magazine. In the United States, it was not taken quite as appreciatively as it was in Japan. Most people complain about the lack of level system and how you can essentially boost the stats of your characters by targeting yourself in battle, which I think is utterly, I think that's malarkey, and I don't think people should hate on a game just because of a mechanic that they chose to abuse. The easy solution is to play the game without hitting yourself, and voila, it's not a broken game.
I think the US reviews or appeal of it who just look at it in their lens that this came out in 2003
True.
for the US, so a lot more RPGs came out by then. It's just a very basic game by those standards then.
That is true. But Final Fantasy II did have sort of a wider reaching impact on the Final Fantasy series as a whole, where we saw the introduction of a few mainstays to the series like Chocobos, the character Cid, and also switching between the front and back row in battle to affect the amount of damage that you deal or the damage that you receive. So a lot of those, or all of those mechanics would be used in the later games. So clearly Final Fantasy II was not trying to disappoint its fans. The development history was, it was pretty smooth. So Sakaguchi already had an idea that there was going to be a sequel whenever they were making Final Fantasy I. So it seemed like a no-brainer that Final Fantasy II would come out, although that's kind of ironic because it has the word final in its name, but that doesn't matter. We just call it Final Fantasy II, and that's it. So the idea, the original concept of the game was to be more about nurture rather than nature, according to Sakaguchi. So I think that's alluding to the fact of how you level up your characters by repeatedly using a certain type of weapon or a certain spell, rather than just leveling up by beating enemies and gaining experience points. It was also interesting that during the development, Final Fantasy II's story came first, and I think that really shows throughout the game, because for an NES game, this has quite an expansive story that goes across multiple characters' lives and multiple continents. I mean, of course, multiple continents is kind of par for the course in RPGs even at this time, but I think it is kind of clear that they chose to go with story first and gameplay later, which is kind of something we see with future Final Fantasy games, where it seems that the even-numbered games are more story-focused, whereas the odd-numbered games are more gameplay-focused, but we'll get into that whenever we start reviewing some of the later Final Fantasy games. And just an interesting piece of trivia is that they had some talks about releasing the game in North America, about translating Final Fantasy II, but by the time they started talking about it, it was already 1991, and the SNES was going to release, the SNES had released, so they kind of scrapped the idea in favor of what was Final Fantasy IV in Japan. They ended up localizing that instead, but having to call it Final Fantasy II because there was no game in between. But if they did localize the real Final Fantasy II in North America, it would have had the subtitle The Dark Shadow over Palakia, that being the country that you're in the game. So I think that's kind of interesting that they had plans for it, but didn't really go forward with it.
So Final Fantasy II is the first game we are covering here that didn't have wasn't released in the West, and because of that reason, we had to use a fan translation to play.
Yeah.
And because it wasn't released in the West, we don't have an English manual to actually go over to tell you what the manual is telling you what to expect, but we do have the Japanese manual, and honestly, it doesn't provide a whole lot of information that you wouldn't know already if you played Final Fantasy I. The key takeaway, I would say, would be just to talk to everyone, especially because they use the password system for playing this game.
Not a save password system.
Thankfully, not a save, password saves.
Yeah.
The passwords, how they work here is whenever you talk to specific NPCs and they tell you something important, they point out the text make it important. You could learn these different like words that are like key phrases essentially, and these act as passwords, and you could use these passwords when talking to other NPCs to get the story or continue getting the story going.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
feel
that would be the one takeaway I would say if you're going into this game. Just make sure to pay attention to what NPCs are actually saying and make sure to get as all the passwords you can.
Yeah, I definitely have a few comments that I want to make on the password system, but we'll save that for the general gameplay discussion.
So, Chad, what's your personal history with Final Fantasy II?
Well, I played it on an emulator back in the day, specifically on the Game Boy Advance. So I played the Dawn of Souls remake, and I played it to completion. I thought it was a good game. Of course, Dawn of Souls introduces that bonus dungeon after the game, which we sadly could not do or would not be able to do in the Famicom version if we had played all the way through. But I also played it on Android, which is the version that I still play to this day sometimes because I kind of like Final Fantasy II.
For me, I have a lot less experience with it. I've only just played it recently, about a year ago, with the Pixel remaster, but I enjoyed it. I thought it aged pretty well. I mean, it's definitely ahead of its time with their ideas, but like probably, or not probably, it's not controversial to say that a lot of the ideas they had gameplay-wise just weren't executed super well.
Yeah, right.
But still very innovative.
Yeah, I think that is the consensus. That very innovative, just not input properly. Like, just so many people get mad about the fact that you can get stronger by beating up yourself. So I think I should explain just a little bit about how the gameplay mechanics work in this game. So as we've alluded to earlier, I think this is like the third or fourth time we've said alluded, but it just seems to be the word that we like to use today. But anyway.
I guess I'm adding an alluded counter to the episode.
Okay, so as we alluded to earlier, the leveling up system is not a traditional JRPG leveling up system where you go fight battles and get experience points. Instead, you gain proficiency in certain weapons that you use, or certain spells that you use, or certain stats that you use to increase them as you use them more, which is something that we see like in the Elder Scroll games in more modern times. And I think it is a good, it's a logical system. In real life, if you use a sword a lot, you're going to be more proficient at using a sword, so you'll have a stronger sword swing than you do, say, using a bow and arrow. You have a stronger sword swing than your bow and arrow mastery. So I kind of like this system. It was innovative for the time, and I still think it works well today. But
I agree. It's a lot more customizable too than like Final Fantasy 1 with your classes. Like you could just make your characters be whatever you want.
Exactly. I do like that. Of course, that kind of leads to the opposite problem where the characters feel like blank slates rather than actual plot motivated characters. But I will say that each of the characters do have their little bits in the story.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. Like yes, they're blank slates when it comes to like gameplay wise, but like they do have somewhat story. Although I would say the main cast doesn't really have much story. Like Guy is just notable for Guy speaks Beaver.
He does speak Beaver.
And like Furion, he's notable for being the main character and almost getting seduced by the queen. That wasn't the queen.
Yeah. And Maria, she is Leon's brother, and Leon is captured at the beginning of the game. That's about it. But one thing that's not great about this system, I will have to complain a little bit about this, is just how much you have to use a certain spell or a certain weapon to increase its level. So it's 100 times that you have to cast a spell in order for it to gain one level. Max level for spells is 16, so that means you have to cast a spell 1600 times to get it to max level. That can lead to a lot of grinding.
Yeah, the Pixel remaster, I like how they approach this because you could boost the rate at which you gain those points for like mastery.
Mm-hmm. Well, there is kind of a way to boost the points, so it's not necessarily just 100 times. The way that you can boost your rate also is to fight stronger enemies, because the enemies in the game have a certain rank, and depending on the enemy's rank, that can also affect the amount of like skill points that you gain to increase a stat.
Yeah, I wish they made it more clear, like, what rank enemies were. Or at least, like, when it came to, like, future releases, like the Pixel Remaster, like, even if it was just, like, a marker in, like, the bestiary to specify it.
Yeah, that is true. And I will say that Final Fantasy II really opened up the door to an open map, I would say. Like, I guess, like, games we've played in the past have had open maps before, but Final Fantasy II feels like the first game where you get severely punished for going to the wrong place in the map.
Yes, that happened to me, actually, whenever I played. I went a
Yeah.
little bit too far west, and I went a little bit too far south at points, and I
Right.
was punished.
Like, I understand using harder enemies to kind of guide you towards the correct path. So, like, oh, there's really hard enemies here, so I should stay away from here until
Yeah.
later.
Yeah, so like Dragon Quest 1 for instance at least had the bridges to like let you know when you're going to get
Mm-hmm.
your ass kicked.
Mm-hmm.
Final Fantasy 2, you just walk a few steps too far, too bad. But in Final Fantasy 2's defense, you can save anywhere in the overworld, and that is such a nice feature that we take for granted today.
That is. And I mean, think about it. The previous games we covered had password save systems. We're finally in the era of getting to save basically anywhere in the overworld. So also another interesting thing to note with just gameplay mechanics in general is the price of the inn. If you stay at an inn, it fluctuates. I shouldn't say fluctuates, but it changes depending on how much HP you have and how much MP you have and how much, or I should say, it changes based on your maximum MP/HP versus your current MP and HP. I kind of like that because it makes inns more expensive later in the game whenever you have more HP, and it makes them cheap at the beginning of the game.
It's fair, but at the same time too, like there becomes a point where it's just like cheaper to use a tent than an inn, and like inn just end up losing all purpose.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't balanced the best way, but I like the system in concept.
Yeah.
And it actually kind of did screw me over at one point in the gameplay of the first hour, but we'll talk about that when it gets there. Is there anything else I want to say about the gameplay? Oh, yeah, the fact that you have MP. In Final Fantasy 1, you just had magic point, like not MP, but you had a certain amount of times that you can use a spell, and that was it. But now there's traditional MP that we saw in the Dragon Quest games.
Yeah, just like your HP, it just spells have a certain amount you have to use. Well, actually, it's based on their level for how much they cost, and you just lower that meter, essentially.
Yep, and while you did say, Tyler, that the characters can kind of be like a blank slate gameplay-wise to suit whatever class you want, whenever you first get the characters, which you start with 3 characters in your party, Furion, Maria, and Guy, whenever they start in your party, they do have certain weapons equipped, and they do have certain stats a little bit higher than the others. So Furion doesn't have any higher stat any stat that is noticeably higher than the others, where Furion is kind of well balanced, treated sort of like a red mage from Final Fantasy 1, and he starts with a sword equipped. So odds are you're going to use Furion as a red mage, basically. So doing some healing, some damaging magic, and also using a sword. It's a good main character. Maria, your female party member, actually starts with a little bit higher agility and intelligence, and also starts with a bow as the weapon. So she makes a pretty good black mage.
I like that they started with a bow too, to really hint or like push you towards putting her in the back row.
Yeah.
Without
yeah.
like just saying it outright.
And then Guy starts with an axe as his weapon, and he also has the highest strength and HP, making him an optimal, warrior class would be the closest thing.
Yeah, like they're started off like the game essentially guides you to like certain archetypes for these characters, but it is very easy to outfit them for your liking. Especially like spells, like to gain like the first few levels of MP, it's very easy since you only have so little MP. Like just a few spell casts is enough to level up MP.
Mm-hmm. I will say that during my gameplay, I decided to go against the character archetypes just to be different. So I guess that's a good segue to lead us into the first hour of the gameplay. So the first hour of Final Fantasy II actually, I think, really starts before we even press start, because there's a prologue scroll that goes through the screen that kind of gives you an understanding of the story. So basically there's a war, there's an evil emperor, and there's a resistance group. And that's pretty much all the information that you're given. And then you start the game, and you have to name your characters. Okay, whatever. Although, I do have to ask you, Tyler, did you name your characters anything?
I named them the canonical names, except I didn't realize Leon was first, or of the guys other than Furion.
Mm-hmm.
So my Leon was actually named Guy.
Oh.
And my Guy, I was like, whenever I was naming the characters, I blanked on like what Leon's name actually was. So I just named him IDK.
Okay. Whenever I was naming the characters, I decided to go with something different, because I've played this game a number of times, and I always name them their canonical names. So I named Furion my own name, Chad. I'm a red mage at heart. I named Maria Julie. Why did I pick that name? I'm not 100% sure. I just needed a female name, and Julie was the first thing to come to my mind. I named Guy Mike. Guy kind of reminds me of our mutual friend, Mike.
I'll have to ask him if he could speak Beaver next time I see him.
Okay. And Leon, oh yeah, I called Leon Larry. I was like, It starts with an L. That's pretty cool. I'm gonna name him Larry. So then at the beginning
Nice.
of the game, well, let's talk about the beginning of the game. So as soon as you name your characters, you're thrown straight into a battle, which is kind of insane for a newcomer to the game. But I think it does a good job of showing you kind of what you can do. It is a forced loss battle, but I'm not 100% sure what the mechanics are. Like if there is a way to have more than one character survive after the first attacks. But for me, at least, Maria was the only character alive after the first onslaught from the opposing force. And it gives you a basic understanding of like, okay, these are the options that you can choose from in battle, and I'm just going to pick attack. So that's exactly what I did. I just picked attack and then proceeded to die. So after that initial battle, you're thrown into the castle in Altea, and this is where you learn the name of the characters that you just named, but this is where you learn that those characters are basically a bunch of,
Like
I guess,
war orphans?
war orphans. Yeah, that's a good way of describing it. They're war orphans, and now they're basically conscripted to work with a resistance force led by Hilda. What a great name. I believe that's a prominent figure in Norse mythology. But anyway, yeah, Hilda tells you that you need to use the keyword Wild Rose to talk with anybody else who's a member of the Resistance, because that's their like password to let them know, like, okay, we can start talking about Resistance things and not have to worry about this evil army from this evil emperor, which introduces you to the idea of the keywords. So what did you think of the keyword system, Tyler?
I liked them in concept, but like it was another thing that just wasn't used too well. Like I don't know, it just ends up evolving until you just spam every keyword to like any NPC that like you can use them to see what happens.
That is exactly what I was thinking. Yeah,
So
it is
like
cool in concept.
yes, I wish they did like something where they punished you if you used the wrong keyword for NPCs, or like locked you out of stuff, or like you didn't get like an extra reward or something like that. Like something simple, but that would go a long way for actually making the player have to pay attention versus just talking to everyone. Because I feel like their intent overall with the keywords was just get players to actually talk to the NPCs, especially because in my opinion, Final Fantasy 1 NPCs were practically useless. It was a waste of time to talk to them, except for the few that you were mandatorily had to talk to.
I agree with that. But yeah, the keywords, while they are cool in concept, it does just devolve into spamming it at every single NPC that you can use the keywords with. I think it was sort of a like rudimentary way of implementing a system where you, the player, can talk to other characters. Because we didn't really see that in other RPGs around this time. Like, other than just like selecting from a 2-option dialogue box of like yes or no, you didn't really get the choice to speak as your character. But anyway, this password or keyword is important for you to use in the next part. So if you go around and talk to the NPCs around the area, they'll tell you that there's another castle called Finn that you need to go to, and there's a bar outside of that castle that has another rebel in it, and you're gonna find this guy named Scott there. But before
you did that, though,
yeah.
did you buy anything or outfit yourself with anything from the Altria before you left?
Yeah, so I decided, so I guess this is where we'll talk about how we outfitted our characters. I didn't buy anything, actually, but, sorry, I did. I did buy one thing. I bought the spell Fire. I wanted to buy a black magic spell.
I bought 2 heal spells, because they were 200 each, where fire or like any of the elemental magic was 400, and they only started you with 400 gold. So I put heal on Firion and Maria, and then I wanted to save up for a black magic of some sort to put on Firion.
Yeah, that's pretty cookie cutter. Like,
but I also wanted to have Guy have heal at some point too.
Okay.
Or just some support spells, because like, doesn't have to always attack. He could help out too.
Yeah, Guy is a prime candidate for spells like Protect, or like more support spells than healing spells or damaging spells. But I decided to go against the archetypes with my characters. So I decided to make Firion barehanded. I wanted to see if I could get his fist leveled up, but it was at that point that it was slightly later in the game that I realized that if you have a shield equipped and you're barehanded, you don't get the barehanded skill points.
Oh.
Yeah, you get the shield points, but you don't get the barehanded skill points, which kind of sucks. But I wanted him to be a barehanded fighter because, you know, it was different. That was it. It wasn't a sword. I just wanted to use something other than a sword. And then I decided to switch the roles of Guy and and Maria. So I had Guy be a mage and Maria be like a warrior, essentially. So I gave Maria the axe and I gave Guy the bow, and then I got the fire spell and gave that to Guy.
Nice.
So
Yeah, I
after,
just
yeah.
stayed standard with the archetypes that's had set up. I kind of wanted to buy some, like I wanted to buy like a spear or something like that to just try out a different weapon type.
Mhm.
But just having so little gold at the start of the game, couldn't really do it.
Yeah, it is a little bit difficult. They really wanted you to feel like a war orphan, stricken with poverty. So after we outfitted ourselves, had to leave Altea, the game makes it pretty clear that you have to head north. In fact, they even say that you have to head north to go to the castle in Finn. So you head north a little bit and you find another town. So
Egatria.
yep, the classic first town in RPGs, very close to the starting castle. But yeah, Gatria, can't say you really do anything notable there.
The one notable thing I would say is like that's where the NPC that tells you about the person in the bar and Finn is.
Okay, yeah.
But other than that, like it's just a good pit stop. Go ahead, heal up at the end, continue forward.
Yep, so you just continue heading north. You encounter a body of water that you have to travel around. Not too big, but it makes it not just a direct straight shot north. And you make it to Finn, and the town is covered in these dark knights or something. I don't know if they have specific names, but just these essentially NPCs walking around where if you talk to any of them, you get thrown into a pretty hard battle.
Yep, I made that mistake and died. Like the other thing too that screws you over is you cannot run from that. Like it's a fight that like it says you can't run, not like you just fail the chance to run. So that was a game over for me. But luckily I had saved like pretty soon before I entered the town, so I didn't really lose any progress.
I find it like I understand that this is an NES game, so they couldn't do anything too technically advanced, but it's funny that you can just walk right in front of these guys and they don't say anything. And it's not until you actually try to interact with them that they actually try to stop you.
Let's see, I will admit it took me longer than I'd like to admit to find the entrance to the bar in Finn, like having to go around the outside of the outskirts of town. But also there's random encounters in the town too. I don't know if you got any of those.
I did get a few random encounters in the town, but those are just your run-of-the-mill enemies that you would encounter outside of the town as well.
Yeah, still found it interesting.
Yeah, I remember my first time playing Final Fantasy II that it was very difficult for me to find the entrance to the bar. So I could imagine that turning off some players, if like first-time players, like, oh, I was told to go to this castle town and to go to this bar, but I can't find the entrance to the bar. This game sucks. Like, I could definitely see that just immediately making people turn this game down.
I don't know, I feel like a lot of people would be saying this game sucks just with the hit rates, especially at the beginning.
Oh yeah, you want to talk about hit rate. So yeah, the few battles that I got into between the beginning town and Finn really did show the qualities of the battles. So I do feel like the hit rate is just extremely low.
For both your party members and the enemies too.
Yes,
I guess
yes,
at least
yes,
it's
yes.
fair that way.
You stole the words out of my mouth. I was going to say that. Yeah, it's fair because it's like you only hit the enemies about 50% of the time and the enemies only hit you about 50% of the time.
Another thing I found interesting about the enemies is that pretty frequently they ran away from you. I don't know if you had that. I think their reason for doing that was to essentially keep players from just grinding by hitting themselves instead. So that way you couldn't just wait for have all the enemies but one live and then just keep beating on yourself to force some levels or stat increases.
Yeah, so I looked up the hit percent formula. So the hit percent formula is your power plus 80 plus another stat. I think that's your weapon hit percentage. So your power plus 80 plus the weapon hit percentage is your hit percentage.
See, I wish, or at least the first time I played Final Fantasy II, I assumed that the reason they were making the hit rate that low is to show it increase over time with your weapon level, but unfortunately that's not the case. I think it'd be a really cool way to show progress with your weapon rank.
That equation also makes me question how do they calculate the enemy hit rate. But yeah, either way, whatever the equation is, it's low at the beginning of the game. I can't say it really annoyed me though. It did make some of the battles go on for a lot longer than they should have, which is why the encounter rate at the end of my first hour is kind of low. But we'll get to that. But yeah, as far as that bar in Finn, I had a pretty easy time finding it. I mean, I knew exactly where to go. I already knew to travel along the outskirts. And when you get in there, you'll see that there's a bunch of guys that look like those knights walking around the town, and they all look bad. But there's one NPC NPC who's different, and he's the bartender, and you have to use the keyword Wild Rose with him. And this is like the one place where I think it's cool that they make you use the keyword, because that makes sense. But because you only have one keyword, it's not hard. Like, it's just like the options come up where you can either ask or learn a keyword, and it's like, well, there's only one keyword to ask. But after you talk to that bartender, he'll show you to a secret room where you can find Scott, and Scott basically gives you some information on what's going on and how you can strengthen the resistance, and then he gives you a ring which you have to take back to Altea.
And then he dies.
Yeah, and just his sprite disappears, and that means he dies. If I remember correctly, they do keep that even in the later releases of the game. At least in the phone port, they have him just disappear.
Yeah, I think that was the case in Pixel Remaster as well.
Yeah, so disappearing equals dead. So after you go back to Altea and show them Scott's ring, they tell you what you should do next, and that is to get Mithril to strengthen the resistance. And Mithril's pretty much a mainstay in the Final Fantasy series. I mean, it's I don't know if I can say it's been mentioned in every mainline game, but most of the mainline games. Mithril's just pretty common in fantasy in general, right? Like, this is based on Dungeons and Dragons. So, and Mithril, I think, originally comes from Lord of the Rings, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so.
So, classic fantasy, you gotta find Mithril, because it's obviously the strongest thing you can use. And when you're told to get Mithril, you're also told to take the priest? I don't know what you would call him, but you get to take Hilda's attendant. Yeah, you get to take Hilda's attendant named Minwu, which is your fourth party member. Or I should say second, because in the first battle you did have Leon. And I think this is where the game kind of shines, giving you this is like the tutorial section of the game. I mean, going to Castle Finn was also a tutorial in itself, but whenever you get Minwu, you don't feel as afraid to travel as far. You can travel, because Minwu is a white mage. Yeah.
Minwu is just a hard carry. Like, he has so many spells that you want to have access to for later in the game.
And they're at high levels.
Yeah, like, he got your back, not your wallet.
Yeah. I will say it came in handy that he knew the life spell as well as just cure, because that saved me a few times.
Absolutely, same here. Any story past this I didn't really get to, because this is the point where I started traveling and then ended up going too far, or I went to areas I shouldn't have gone to yet. And interestingly, the last encounter I got into, guess how long it took I was in that battle for? How many minutes?
3 minutes.
8 minutes.
Okay.
I got into a battle with a single ogre mage. It casted the blind status on my characters.
Okay.
So the only damage I had was Maria with fire to do any consistent damage, since no one could hit because the hit rates already suck.
Yeah.
Minwu just was constantly having to either revive people with life or just healing the party so they stayed alive. And then anyone else who was alive just tried to hit it. But then at one point too, another thing too that Final Fantasy II added is you could just select your entire party to cast a spell on, or all the enemies to cast a spell on. So yeah, I tried doing that, and I accidentally scrolled too fast at one point and healed the ogre mage too with Minwu.
Okay.
So it was like starting over the battle again. But at that point, I was in sunk cost fallacy. I was in too deep with that battle. I wanted to see what stat level ups I would get.
Okay.
And literally only Minwu got any level ups there. Not even any of my other characters.
Wow. I want to say, when Minwu joined the party, I opened up the pause menu, and I had to appreciate the character face sprites. Because thinking that this is a game made in 1988 made me appreciate that the pixel art is pretty good for a Famicom game, at least for the face sprites. They put a lot of detail in such a small space. Although Maria's face is ghostly white. Her face is whiter than Minwu's turban. Well,
I have to get the hex code on that one to verify it.
I'm sorry to hear, Tyler, that you seems like your hour was kind of cut short considering how far I made it, but I'll just continue on with where I went. So once you get Minwu in your party, you also get a canoe. So canoe was something in Final Fantasy 1, but in Final Fantasy 2 you get it much earlier, and you can travel across small bodies of water, which are a lighter shade of blue in the overworld. And I think this is great, having the canoe so early in the game, and I can only imagine how excited somebody would be if they played Final Fantasy Fantasy 1 to see that they got the canoe less than an hour into the game. So you get the canoe, and you're also told to get Mithril, you have to travel to this town called Salamand, and it's to the north. And that's pretty much all they give you. And there's a small body of water directly to the north, but you could either go like slightly to the west or slightly to the east. There's like basically a split between the middle of this small body of water. And you have to go slightly to the east to get to the next area. But whenever I was adventuring around with Minwoo in my party, I decided to, in one of the battles, I decided to cast one of the spells on like a goblin or some easy enemy that I was fighting. And it happened to be a spell where you swap your HP and MP with an enemy. And yeah, it worked. And it gave Minwoo 6 HP and 0 MP from the goblin. So
fun fact, that's a very easy way to cheese the game for getting stat increase or HP and MP.
Oh yeah, well, I definitely did get some stat increases with Minwoo there, but what was horrible about it was healing at the inn after that. So because of the price system of the inn being related to your maximum HP versus your current HP, I had to spend more money than I had to just rest at the inn.
Wait,
so,
did the game even let you rest at the inn and just like not fully heal you, or what did it do?
No, it just, I couldn't. Like, oh, sorry, you can't rest at the inn. You're not admitted. Which I guess begs the question, what would happen if you had like 1 HP for all of your characters? Would you just be forced to get a game over? I don't know.
Well, I think in the first town, there might be that healing like circle you could go to. Like, like where you start the game like after the forced loss.
Yeah, that room.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what?
I don't know if that actually does heal you or not.
I don't think so, or if it does, I never really use that, because I never really had an issue with the inns early in the game. I just never tried to use the spell where you swap HP and MP. It's just weird because they're named differently in the Famicom version. Or at least the translation that we were playing in the Famicom version. But anyway, so you travel north a little bit and you get to this town called Palom. I almost wonder if this was the reference in if this was made into a reference in Final Fantasy IV with Palom and Porom, the two mages.
I thought the same thing whenever I played FF2 the first time.
Yeah, because there's certainly other callbacks to FF2 in FF4.
Well, even FF1, because like Mysidia being very prominent in FF4 as well as like FF1.
True. Town of Mages. So anyway, you travel to the town of Palom. You learn that there's a boat there that can get you to travel farther north, and it costs 20 coins, or 20 gold. What currency am I thinking of? 20 gil, and it's not that hard to get that much money. I mean, you get that in like a single battle. So you pay the nice pirate 20 gold and you go north to the town of Poft. It's a pretty decent boat trip. Like, I couldn't imagine making that by foot. I think the map is connected in such a way that you could do it on foot.
You can.
But it's not worth it. It's definitely worth the 20 gold to just travel north by boat. So yeah, you get to the town of Poft and you also learn that there's a guy with an airship that'll travel you around places named Sid. So you're already meeting Sid less than an hour into the game if you know where you're going, which is pretty cool. And he's already associated with an airship, which is something we'll see in basically every future Final Fantasy game. Yeah, so the enemies don't really seem to get that much harder in this area outside of the town of Salamand. There was one enemy, I think it was just called like Soldier or something, that was kind of tough, but overall the enemies are still very easy, and even if any of the enemies are giving you a hard time, you have Minwoo who can just heal you. But once you get to Salamand, then it becomes, I guess, not really a scavenger hunt, but you have to find this guy named Joseph, because while you're traveling around, you learn that there's a guy named Joseph that knows about Mithril. So you talk to Joseph about Mithril, and he tells you that to get Mithril, you need to save people from this place called Semet Falls, because Semet Falls is where the Empire is making a bunch of people work as slaves to mine Mithril. So, or no, I don't think are they mining Mithril? They're mining something. But anyway, Semet Falls is essentially the first real dungeon of the game. And that's where the game kind of lets you loose. And it's alright. The first dungeon, it's not too confusing, but there's a lot of paths that just lead to dead ends. And that gets much, much worse later in the game, where there are dozens of paths that lead you to dead ends in some of those later game dungeons.
So did you actually make it into Semet Falls, or did you kind of just like get there and then...
I made it to Semet Falls, and I made it to the second floor of Semet Falls, the second basement floor of Semet Falls. And it was after that I stopped. But I noticed that the battles were starting to get a little bit longer. In fact, at the point where I stopped, I was actually traveling back to Salamand hand to heal my MP. Because while you do have a ton of healing spells that you can use with Minwu, he is limited by the fact that he only has so much MP. It does run out eventually. But overall, the first hour of the game was pretty enjoyable for me. I already pointed out I like the graphic of the game. I mean, they're simple. The battle background's completely black. DQ1 still impresses me with those, not quite animated, but colored backgrounds. I know it was because there was only one enemy, but still, DQ1 had the best battle backgrounds, and that was the first one to come out. All of these later games just have black backgrounds.
I have to say, like, playing FF2 versus 1, like, it felt the same way, like, playing DQ2 versus DQ1, like, just such a significant upgrade in, like, almost every aspect. Like, even when it came to, like, Overworld or whatever, like, so much more options when it comes to the exploration. Like, DQ2, like, you had, like, way more options you could go. You weren't, like, forced to just go one direction. And, like, that's exactly how, like, Final Fantasy 2 functions, too.
I guess. I mean, in Final Fantasy 1, at least during my first hour, I was able to get the boat in Final Fantasy 1. So the world really opens up once you get the boat. The same way the world kind of opens up whenever you get the canoe in Final Fantasy 2.
I'm saying more just like starting area, but like even without the canoe, you could travel, like you could go to a lot of places you shouldn't be going in Final Fantasy 2.
Yeah, I agree with that. Though I can imagine that could lead to a lot of frustration, because if you don't know where to go, if you didn't talk to the NPCs that told you to travel north, then it could be a little bit confusing and you might get into battles that are too tough for you to fight. The music in the game is pretty good too. I like that they tried to go for something different from Final Fantasy 1. Nobuo Uematsu, while these aren't like his most iconic pieces of music, I feel like it did a good job of being different from Final Fantasy 2, but still similar enough that you can tell they're from the same series.
See, I guess one other thing I noticed too was like they did not reuse sprites from Final Fantasy 1, like when it came to enemies. Like the Goblin sprite was a new sprite. Like I just found it interesting instead of like the Dragon Quest approach, like just adding more enemies and reusing sprites when needed.
Yeah, that is true. I guess they feel like their style could always be improved, whereas I guess Dragon Quest was already at peak. You can't improve peak.
Right. I mean, just look at Slime.
Yeah, iconic. Yeah, that is interesting that Final Fantasy doesn't really have an equivalent to the slime. I guess you could say it's the Goblin, but the Goblin has changed in basically every iteration. So
yeah, but who's buying Goblin merch either?
Yeah, you
have the Cactar, you have the Tonberry, and like the Bomb.
Yeah, but we wouldn't see those enemies until the SNES games.
Right. But then, like, other than, like, Moogles and, like, Chocobos, like, that's it for, like, iconic, like, mascots, per se.
I mean, if you're talking just about all mascots, to be fair, the only mascot for Dragon Quest is the slime.
No.
I agree that all of the enemies are pretty iconic, but, like, whenever I go to conventions or things like that, I really only see slime merch.
Yeah, but, like, the slime merch is, like, of every variant of slime.
Yeah, right. But anyway, this isn't a podcast about merchandise.
Not yet.
Oh, one other thing I forgot to note. Whenever you're walking around the overworld, you'll occasionally see an airship flying around. Did you happen to see?
Yeah, I encountered that a few times.
And you learn that the Empire has control of an airship, and they talk about like how they're using this airship for Empire stuff, but also Sid has an airship. So it kind of like makes you think like, oh, is this the Empire's airship or is this Sid's airship?
Well, it just makes the world feel more alive, like stuff's going on as you're traveling, like it's not like stagnant.
Right, and that's where I really feel that the game put story first and gameplay second.
All right, so we discussed what we did within the first hour, but there's a few things that we didn't get to encounter during our first hour. The first being that your fourth party member is not static. Like, so Minwu, don't get too attached to him because he will leave your party at some point. You'll have other characters that switch out.
Yeah, I will say that Final Fantasy 2 is notable for featuring death, although not too many. I think really only one of your fourth party members. No, what am I talking about? I mean, because we have the Soul of Reaper, like bonus content in the GBA and later ports of the game where there are 4 party members.
Yeah, that's probably split about 50-50 on like which ones live and die.
Actually, in the Soul of Rebirth, you also get to play as Scott, and he's never one of your party members. So I think there's 3.
Interesting. But yeah, and the other notable thing that we missed out on was the inclusions of Chocobos and riding them.
Yeah, first game to include them.
Yeah, Chocobos just such a mainstay and just iconic for Final Fantasy in general.
Even more so, their theme is iconic.
All right, time to play 5 minutes of Hip Hop Day Chocobo.
So, Tyler, within your first hour of gameplay, how many towns did you visit?
3.
Okay, well, I visited 6, yeah.
Yeah, like, I don't know, it's like you have like double the amount of towns, but like it would not have taken, like, it would have taken me maybe like 5 more minutes to get to that other town and ride the boat.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, it really isn't that much difference when you think about it.
Yeah, but I do feel like the progression from town to town was a little bit faster in Final Fantasy II compared to some of the earlier games that we played.
Yes.
Because I feel like developers are kind of now getting the understanding of how to make an RPG feel challenging but rewarding at the same time. So, not too many towns visited. How many dungeons did you visit?
0.
Okay, well, I only visited one, Summit Falls, but throughout all of your adventures, how many enemies did you encounter?
32 battles, which
Okay.
ends up being about 0.53 encounters per minute.
All right, all right. And I'm not that much farther ahead than you. 33 enemies in 1 hour, which is about 0.55 per minute. So yeah, these battles are definitely a lot longer than the previous games we've played.
Right, but part of that just because the hit rate was so low.
I agree. So
How many times did you die, or did you die at all? Like, have a game over?
yeah, I never got a game over. I had a few party members fall in battle, but luckily Minwoo was able to bring them back with his life spell.
Yeah, for me it was twice. Once, like I said, with that soldier accidentally talking to, and then another time going a little bit too far south and just got some skeletons, like, really just destroyed me instantly. How
So
long did it take you to get your first encounter?
well, technically only 58 seconds if we want to count that forced encounter at the beginning, but to be fair, the first random encounter I had was at 7 minutes and 48 seconds.
For me, it was 6 minutes 30 seconds, and I just didn't count that forced encounter at all. It just didn't feel right.
Yeah, right. It is not really a fair judgment to see how long it takes to get into that encounter because you just have to start the game. Now, for the first level up, it feels kind of disingenuous to call just getting a stat increase a level up, but the next closest thing to a traditional level up that you have in Final Fantasy II is a weapon level or a spell level.
Mhm.
But for the sake of this segment, when was your first stat increase?
7 minutes 12 seconds. I don't know the specific stat. I want to say it was HP.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like pretty much after your first encounter, you're almost guaranteed to get some stat increase. Because my first stat increase was after my first battle at 8 minutes
Yes.
30 seconds. But I will say, and this does exceed the 1 hour mark that we set for ourselves, but I will say I finished the battle that I was in the middle of, where my hour concluded, and at the end of that battle, I leveled up my axe weapon level with Maria, and that was at 1 hour, 1 minute, 30 seconds. That is a very long time to gain one level.
Right.
So the last question is, how many times did you have to visit an inn?
Just 4, because, like, once you get Minwoo, just, you don't need the inn for a long time.
I definitely agree. I only had to visit the inn 3 times.
So that concludes our discussion of our first hour with Final Fantasy II. We hope that we gave a good representation of what the game has to offer within the first hour and what you could expect during your first hour of gameplay. At the very least, we hope we made it entertaining or made it interesting enough for you to check out the first hour.
Oh yeah. So thank you guys for listening, and we look forward to presenting to you Dragon Quest IV next week. Until then, see you later.
Thank you for watching today and sticking to the end. We hope we gave an accurate representation of the first hour of gameplay, and more importantly, we hope we inspired you to check out the game and give it a chance. If you liked the video, please like, comment, and subscribe for more JRPG content from us. We have a lot of projects in production, so keep an eye out. Let us know what games and series you'd like us to cover in the future. Follow us on Twitter at encounter_rate. If you want to listen to our content in a podcast format, check us out at the places listed on screen. Links will be in description. We plan to upload to additional podcast sites in the future, and if you have any preferred podcast sites you wish we were on, let us know in the comments. Thank you again for watching. Until next time, have a great day.